Fairy tale matchmakers. Because first impressions have been ruining relationships since the Middle Ages. Looking for true love? Tired of dating princes who secretly have the personality of stale bread? Introducing fairy tale matchmakers. For over 600 completely unlicensed years, we've been pairing terrified villagers with mysterious strangers they absolutely did not ask for. Nervous about your arranged marriage? Don't worry. He might only look like a horrifying woodland nightmare. There's at least a 50-50 chance he's actually royalty. Meet some of our satisfied clients. I thought he was going to eat me. He just needed therapy. 5 stars. I married a pig. Turns out he was a prince. 5 stars. I was told not to look at my husband. I looked anyway. That one got complicated. 5 stars. At Fairy Tale Matchmakers, we specialize in cursed princes, emotionally unavailable nobles, mysterious castles with suspiciously free room service, talking furniture, jealous sisters, completely unnecessary prophecies. Still worried? Ask about our exclusive Judge the Heart Not the Hair program. Perfect for anyone meeting a Renaissance noble with exceptional grooming challenges. Disclaimer. Fairy Tale Matchmakers is not responsible for enchanted castles, evil fairies, magical roses, invisible servants, Greek gods, prophetic dreams, witches, wolves, bears, pigs, swans, frogs, snakes, accidental curses, spontaneous transformations, or discovering your spouse is actually your third cousin, according to 18th century French nobility. Side effects may include character development, emotional maturity, breaking ancient curses, questioning your childhood, and subscribing to history documentaries. Fairy Tale Matchmakers. Because happily ever after takes work, and occasionally a medically misunderstood Renaissance gentleman. Disclaimer. Welcome to another episode where we're about to ruin another childhood classic. If your favorite version of Beauty and the Beast involves singing furniture, dancing teacups, and a chandelier with better emotional intelligence than most people on the internet, relax. Disney didn't invent this story. They borrowed it from centuries of folklore, mythology, and one very real family whose lives were stranger than fiction. As always, this documentary relies on historical records, surviving manuscripts, academic research, mythology, folklore, and documented evidence where available. When historians disagree, I'll tell you. When something is legend, I'll call it legend. And if your entire personality depends on believing every fairy tale happened exactly like the cartoon, this might be a rough hour. Now grab your espresso, hide the enchanted rose before somebody steals it, and let's go meet the beast.
Beauty and the Beast. The true story that inspired the fairy tale. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Set up one central question. Fairy tales aren't created in a vacuum. They evolve. Stories travel across borders, across centuries, across civilizations. Every generation removes a little darkness, adds a little hope, until the original becomes almost impossible to recognize. Beauty and the Beast may be one of the greatest examples of that transformation. Behind the romance lies exploitation, arranged marriage, mythology, Renaissance politics, medical history, and one remarkable family whose portraits still survive nearly 500 years later. Today, we're following every thread. The fairy tale everyone thinks they know. Every generation has its own version of Beauty and the Beast. For many people, it's the Disney classic. A lonely prince cursed for his arrogance. A beautiful young woman who looks beyond appearances. Singing candlesticks, dancing teacups, a happily ever after wrapped in music and magic. It's become one of the most recognizable love stories ever told. But here's the thing. That's not the original story. Not even close. Like so many fairy tales we've explored on this channel, the version most people know today is the polished edition. The sharp edges were filed down. The uncomfortable questions were softened. The darker themes were pushed quietly into the background until all that remained was a romantic fantasy. The deeper you dig, the stranger it becomes. Long before animated castles and enchanted roses, Beauty and the Beast was a story about fear. Fear of arranged marriage. Fear of the unknown. Fear of giving your life to someone you barely knew. Imagine being a young woman in 17th or 18th century Europe. Love wasn't always part of the equation. Families negotiated marriages for money, land, alliances, or social standing. A husband could be decades older. He could be a complete stranger. Once the marriage was arranged, there was often little choice but to accept it. To many young women, that unknown husband may have seemed like a beast. Not because he was physically monstrous, but because he represented an uncertain future. Fairy tales became a way to wrestle with those fears. They offered hope that beneath an intimidating exterior there might be kindness. That affection could grow where none existed before. That appearances could deceive. Yet those comforting lessons didn't appear overnight. They evolved over centuries, shaped by storytellers, poets, scholars, and ordinary people passing stories from one generation to the next. By the time Disney adapted Beauty and the Beast in 1991, the tale had already been retold countless times. Each version reflected the values of its own era, smoothing away older ideas while adding new ones. But every rewrite left traces of the stories that came before. Buried beneath the romance, beneath the magic, beneath the ballroom dances and enchanted servants, lies something much older. A web of ancient mythology, medieval folklore, Renaissance history, and perhaps the extraordinary life of one real man whose appearance shocked Europe and whose story still survives in paintings hanging in museums today. His name was Petrus Gonsalvus. Born with a condition so rare that people believed he wasn't fully human, he would spend his life caught between curiosity and cruelty, celebrated by kings while being treated by little more than an exhibit. His remarkable marriage would echo across history, eventually becoming linked to one of the world's most enduring fairy tales. But before we can understand how a real family may have inspired Beauty and the Beast, we first have to meet the woman who transformed centuries of legends into the story we recognize today. And that journey begins in 18th century France, with an aristocratic writer whose version of the tale was far stranger, darker, and far more complicated than most people could ever imagine. The original Beauty and the Beast. If you walked into a bookstore today and picked up Beauty and the Beast, chances are you'd expect a fairly short fairy tale. You'd be wrong. The version that most people know today isn't the original. It's actually a heavily condensed retelling. The first complete literary version of Beauty and the Beast was published in 1740 by the French author Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. And compared to the story we know today, it was enormous. Villeneuve's tale stretched hundreds of pages and read more like a fantasy novel than a bedtime story. It was filled with royal conspiracies, hidden identities, magical politics, jealous fairies, elaborate backstories, and enough plot twists to make a modern television writer jealous. Disney didn't invent Beauty and the Beast. They inherited it. Then they trimmed away almost everything except its emotional core. To understand why Villeneuve wrote such an elaborate story, we first have to understand the world she lived in. 18th century France was a society obsessed with appearances. Noble families carefully guarded their reputations. Marriages were business arrangements. Wealth determined status. Women often possessed little control over the course of their own lives. Villeneuve knew that world firsthand. Born into a family of minor nobility, she married young. The marriage proved disastrous. Her husband squandered much of the family's fortune before his death, leaving her widowed and struggling financially. Rather than disappear into obscurity, she did something unusual for a woman of her time. She became a professional writer. Moving to Paris, Villeneuve supported herself through literature, writing novels, essays, and fairy tales for an audience that couldn't get enough of stories filled with romance, mystery, and moral lessons. But these weren't children's stories. That's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about fairy tales. They weren't originally written for bedtime. They were written for adults. They entertained aristocrats in elegant drawing rooms and royal salons. Guests would gather to read elaborate tales aloud, discussing the symbolism, hidden meanings, and social commentary tucked beneath the fantasy. Fairy tales were entertainment, but they were also mirrors. Mirrors reflecting the fears, hopes, and anxieties of the society that created them. Villeneuve's Beauty and the Beast opens with a wealthy merchant whose fortunes collapse almost overnight. His ships are lost, his home is destroyed, his family is forced to abandon luxury and begin a far humbler life in the countryside. While Beauty adapts with quiet grace, her older sisters spend their days complaining, longing for the wealth they've lost. Already the story is doing something unexpected. Beauty isn't admired because she's beautiful. She's admired because she's compassionate. Kindness, humility, patience, those are her greatest strengths. Then comes the moment that changes everything. The merchant loses his way during a violent storm and stumbles upon a mysterious castle that seems abandoned. A magnificent feast waits on the table. Fires burn warmly in empty rooms. Every comfort has somehow been prepared for a guest no one expected. Hungry and exhausted, the merchant accepts the castle's hospitality. The following morning, before leaving, he notices an extraordinary rose garden. Remembering the simple request his youngest daughter made before he left home, he reaches out and picks a single rose. One flower? That's all it takes. Suddenly the silence breaks. A terrifying beast emerges from the shadows, furious that someone has stolen what he treasures most. The merchant begs for mercy, explaining that the flower was meant for his daughter. The beast listens, then offers a bargain. The merchant may leave alive, but only if one of his daughters willingly takes his place. It's a chilling choice. And it's also the emotional heart of the story. Beauty isn't kidnapped. She chooses to go. Not because she's fearless, because she loves her father. That decision sets in motion one of literature's most enduring relationships. But once Beauty arrives at the beast's castle, something strange begins to happen. The monster behaves nothing like a monster. And that's where the real mystery begins. Inside the enchanted castle, Beauty expected a prison. Instead, she found a palace. There were no chains, no dungeon, no cruel master waiting to torment her. The castle was magnificent beyond imagination. Towering halls echoed with silence. Fires were always burning. Tables overflowed with elaborate feasts. Every room seemed prepared specifically for her arrival. Yet one thing was missing. People. Beauty called out. No one answered. Invisible hands prepared her meals. Invisible servants kept the castle spotless. Every comfort appeared exactly when she needed it, as though the castle itself were alive. It was unsettling. But it was never openly threatening. Then she met the beast. He was exactly what the merchant had described. Large. Terrifying. Covered in fur. Possessing the features of several animals blended into one impossible creature. Yet almost immediately, Beauty noticed something unexpected. The beast was painfully polite. He never forced himself into her company. He never demanded affection. He asked permission before joining her meals. He listened when she spoke. And every evening, he asked the same question. Beauty, will you marry me? Every evening. She gently refused. Every evening. He accepted her answer. No threats. No anger. Just sadness. Modern audiences sometimes imagine the beast as violent or controlling, because later adaptations often heighten his temper for dramatic effect. Villeneuve's beast is different. He's lonely. Deeply lonely. His greatest fear isn't rejection. It's remaining alone forever. As the weeks passed, Beauty's fear slowly gave way to curiosity. She discovered libraries filled with books, magnificent galleries, music, art, gardens unlike anything she had ever seen. Magical windows allowed her to watch operas and plays from distant cities without ever leaving the castle. Exotic birds filled elaborate aviaries. Monkeys and parrots served as attendants. Every room revealed another impossible wonder. But the greatest mystery wasn't hidden inside the castle. It came every night in her dreams. While she slept, a handsome prince appeared. He spoke gently. He seemed trapped. He begged her not to judge by appearances. Beauty became convinced that somewhere inside the castle a prisoner was being held captive. Every day she searched. Secret passages. Hidden chambers. Locked rooms. She explored everything. The prince was nowhere to be found. Unknown to Beauty. The answer had been standing in front of her all along. As time passed, the Beast and Beauty formed something neither had expected. Not romance. Not yet. Friendship. Mutual respect. Genuine affection. It wasn't built through magic. It wasn't built through destiny. It was built through conversation. Through patience. Through learning who someone truly was after first impressions had faded away. That's one of the reasons this version has fascinated scholars for centuries. Beneath the fantasy, Villeneuve wasn't simply telling a love story. She was asking a question. How much of our judgment is based on appearance? And how much changes once we actually know someone? Eventually, Beauty began to miss her family. The Beast saw the sadness in her eyes. Once again, he surprised her. Instead of refusing, he gave her permission to leave. There was only one condition. She had to return. It seemed like a simple promise. Neither of them realized it would become the moment that nearly destroyed them both. The promise, the betrayal, and the curse. Before Beauty left, the Beast gave her two gifts. The first was a magical ring. The second, his trust. He told her that whenever she wished to return, all she had to do was place the ring on the table before she slept. By morning, she would awaken back at the castle. Beauty promised she would return within 2 months. It seemed like an easy promise to keep. She slipped on the ring, closed her eyes, and by dawn she was standing once again in her father's humble cottage. Her family could hardly believe what they were seeing. The daughter they had feared was dead, now stood before them more radiant than ever. She wore magnificent gowns. She looked healthy, confident, at peace. Even more surprising, she spoke kindly of the Beast. That puzzled everyone, especially her sisters. They expected horror stories. Instead, Beauty described a creature who treated her with dignity and respect. Jealousy began to grow. While Beauty's life had unexpectedly improved, her sisters remained bitter, unhappy, and consumed by envy. According to Villeneuve's story, even their own suitors found themselves captivated by Beauty's grace and kindness. That only fueled their resentment. As the 2-month deadline approached, Beauty prepared to keep her promise. But her sisters had other plans. They begged her to stay. They cried, they pleaded, they pretended they simply couldn't bear to lose her again. It was all an act. Their real hope was far darker. They believed that if Beauty returned late, the Beast would become enraged and kill her. Envy has always been one of the oldest villains in fairy tales. Not dragons, not witches, not monsters. Jealousy. Beauty finally gave in and delayed her return. Then one night, she had a dream. She saw the beast lying alone near a cave, barely alive. His strength was fading. He called her name. Then everything went silent. Beauty awoke in terror. For the first time, she realized something she had never admitted to herself. She didn't simply care about the beast. She loved him, not because a spell forced her to, not because she pitied him, but because she had come to know the person beneath the frightening exterior. Without hesitation, she placed the magical ring on the table. The next morning, she was back at the castle, but something was wrong. The halls were silent. No feast awaited her. No servants moved through the corridors. The castle itself seemed to be grieving. She searched every room, called his name, received no answer. Finally, near the cave she had seen in her dream, she found him. The beast lay motionless upon the ground, weak, barely breathing. He believed Beauty had abandoned him. He had simply given up. Overcome with sorrow, Beauty threw herself beside him. She wept. She embraced him. And at last, she spoke the words neither of them ever expected. "I love you." She promised she would marry him. In that instant, the curse was broken. Or at least, that's what most people think happened, because Villeneuve's original story wasn't finished. In fact, the transformation from beast to prince is where the strangest part of the entire fairy tale actually begins. The happy ending everyone remembers? That's only the beginning of the final mystery. The fairy tale that almost no one remembers. If you've only seen the Disney version, this is the point where the story usually ends. The beast transforms. The curse is broken. Everyone celebrates. Roll the credits. But that isn't how Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve ended her story. Not even close. In the original version, the transformation raises far more questions than it answers. Beauty awakens the following morning expecting to see the beast. Instead, standing before her is the handsome prince who had visited her dreams night after night. The mysterious prisoner she'd searched for throughout the castle had never existed as a separate person. The beast and the prince were one and the same. It was a revelation. But it wasn't the biggest one. Moments later, a magnificent fairy appeared. Alongside her stood the prince's mother, the queen. Together they revealed a truth that turned everything Beauty believed about herself upside down. Beauty wasn't actually the daughter of a merchant. She was a princess. At birth, she had been secretly hidden away and raised by the merchant's family for her own protection. Her true identity had been concealed for years. As for the beast, his curse had nothing to do with an enchantress punishing selfishness, as later versions would suggest. Villeneuve's explanation was considerably stranger. According to the fairy, the prince had been raised by an elderly fairy godmother after the death of his parents. As he grew older, she became obsessed with him. Eventually, she demanded that he marry her. The prince refused. Not out of cruelty, but because he had always viewed her as a mother figure. Humiliated and consumed by rage, the fairy used her magic to transform him into a beast. It wasn't a lesson in humility. It was an act of revenge. The curse trapped him inside a monstrous body, isolating him from the world while he waited for someone capable of seeing beyond appearances. Even Beauty's life had been quietly guided toward this moment. The fairy explained that destiny had been unfolding long before either of them realized it. Their meeting wasn't random. Their lives had been intertwined from the beginning. With the curse finally broken, the castle itself seemed to awaken. The stone statues scattered throughout the grounds came back to life. They weren't statues at all. They had been human servants frozen by the same magic that had imprisoned the prince. Music once again filled the halls. The castle burst back into life. Beauty's family was welcomed into the royal court. The prince reclaimed his kingdom. And the two were married in a celebration worthy of a fairy tale. It's a remarkably elaborate ending. Hidden princesses, jealous fairies, royal bloodlines, family secrets, magical politics. It's less a simple fairy tale than a sprawling fantasy novel. Yet within 16 years of its publication, much of that complexity would disappear. In 1756, another French writer, Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont, rewrote the story. She dramatically shortened it, removed most of the political intrigue, eliminated the hidden royal lineage, discarded the jealous fairy godmother, and transformed it into a concise moral tale intended to educate young readers. That streamlined version spread rapidly across Europe. It became the foundation for nearly every adaptation that followed, including Disney's. But while Villeneuve may have been the first to write Beauty and the Beast as we recognize it today, she wasn't telling an entirely original story. The idea of a young woman marrying a beast, then discovering the humanity hidden beneath the monster, was already centuries old. In fact, it had been wandering through folklore long before Villeneuve ever picked up her pen. The stories that came before the beast. One of the biggest misconceptions about fairy tales is that someone simply sat down one day and invented them. That's almost never how folklore works. Stories don't appear out of thin air. They evolve. They borrow. They absorb pieces of older legends until tracing their origins becomes almost impossible. Beauty and the Beast is no exception. Long before Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve published her famous version in 1740, tales of mysterious bridegrooms disguised as animals had already been circulating across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East for centuries. Folklorists now group many of these narratives under what is known as the animal bridegroom tale type. The creature changes, but the pattern remains remarkably familiar. A young woman is separated from her family. She marries someone who appears frightening or inhuman. Over time, she discovers compassion where she expected cruelty. Eventually, the creature's true identity is revealed. Sometimes it's a prince. Sometimes it's a cursed nobleman. Sometimes the transformation is physical. Other times, it's entirely emotional. Depending on the culture, the bridegroom might appear as a snake, a bear, a lion, a frog, a hedgehog, a lobster, even a pig. Strange as those stories sound today, they all explore the same universal question. Can we learn to love someone we initially fear? That question mattered deeply in societies where marriages were often arranged. For countless young women throughout history, the man they married wasn't someone they had chosen. He might be older, wealthier, a complete stranger. Marriage wasn't always the beginning of romance. Sometimes, it was the beginning of uncertainty. These stories offered reassurance. They suggested that appearances could deceive, that kindness might exist beneath an intimidating exterior, that affection could grow over time. They weren't promising perfection. They were offering hope. One of the oldest and most fascinating versions of this idea emerged not in France, but in Italy. More than 2 centuries before Villeneuve ever wrote Beauty and the Beast, an Italian author named Giovan Francesco Straparola included a bizarre tale in his famous collection, The Pleasant Nights. It was called The Pig King. At first glance, the story sounds almost absurd. A prince is born as a pig. He talks. He behaves like royalty. Yet he still wallows happily in the mud. As he reaches adulthood, he announces that he wants a wife. The king and queen reluctantly agree. A poor family's eldest daughter is chosen to marry him. She is horrified. Rather than accept her fate, she plots to murder her husband. The pig prince overhears the plan and kills her instead. His second wife makes the same mistake. She meets the same fate. Only the third sister approaches him differently. She treats him with kindness. She speaks to him with respect. She looks beyond the skin he wears. Then, one night, the prince reveals the truth. He isn't truly a pig. After dark, he sheds his skin and becomes a handsome young man. His monstrous appearance was only a disguise. Eventually, the enchanted skin is destroyed. The prince remains permanently human. And, like so many fairy tales, the story ends with a royal wedding. Sound familiar? The details differ, but the emotional blueprint is unmistakable. A frightening husband, a patient bride, a hidden identity, a transformation, a happily ever after. Yet even the Pig King wasn't the beginning. These stories stretch back further still. Beyond medieval Europe, beyond the Renaissance, beyond written fairy tales altogether, to find the oldest ancestor of Beauty and the Beast, we have to leave history behind and step into the world of Greek mythology. There we meet a young woman whose beauty angered a goddess, and whose mysterious husband could only visit her in the darkness of night. Cupid and Psyche, the first Beauty and the Beast. Nearly 2,000 years before Beauty and the Beast was written, there was Psyche. Her story appears in The Golden Ass, a Roman novel written by Apuleius in the 2nd century AD. It isn't the same story, but the similarities are impossible to ignore. Psyche was a mortal princess whose beauty became legendary. People traveled from distant lands simply to look upon her. Temples once devoted to Aphrodite began attracting worshippers who praised Psyche instead. To the goddess of love, it was an unforgivable insult. Furious, Aphrodite summoned her son, Cupid. She ordered him to strike Psyche with one of his enchanted arrows so she would fall hopelessly in love with the ugliest creature on earth. There was just one problem. Cupid looked at Psyche and accidentally pierced himself with his own arrow. Instead of cursing her, He fell deeply in love with her. Yet, despite her extraordinary beauty, no one dared marry Psyche. Men admired her. They praised her. But they feared her. Her beauty had become something almost supernatural. Desperate for answers, Psyche's father consulted the oracle of Apollo. The prophecy was terrifying. He was told to dress his daughter as though she were going to her funeral. Lead her to the top of a lonely mountain and leave her there. According to the oracle, her future husband was no ordinary man. He was a fearsome being, feared even by the gods themselves. Imagine hearing that on your wedding day. Most people get flowers. Psyche got a prophecy that basically said, "Congratulations, you're marrying a nightmare." Accepting what she believed was her fate, Psyche was left alone upon the mountain. Then the impossible happened. The gentle west wind carried her away. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a magnificent palace unlike anything she had ever imagined. There were no servants in sight, yet invisible voices welcomed her. Lavish banquets appeared without anyone preparing them. Music echoed through empty halls. Every luxury she could imagine had somehow been provided. It sounds strangely familiar. An isolated palace. Invisible servants. A mysterious host. A frightened young woman trying to understand where she is. Every night her husband visited her, but always in complete darkness. He made only one request. She must never try to see his face. Over time, Psyche fell deeply in love with the gentle stranger she knew only by his voice. Then her sisters arrived. And just like Beauty's sisters, centuries later, they poisoned her happiness. Consumed by jealousy, they convinced Psyche she wasn't married to a loving husband at all. They insisted she was sleeping beside a monster, waiting for the perfect moment to devour both her and the child she carried. Fear began to replace trust. One night, unable to resist any longer, Psyche lit an oil lamp. For the first time, she saw her husband's face. He wasn't a monster. He was Cupid himself. Startled, Psyche accidentally spilled hot oil onto his shoulder. The pain awakened him. Realizing she had broken the one promise he had asked her to keep, Cupid fled. Instantly, the enchanted palace vanished. Everything Psyche loved disappeared. What followed wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a journey. Aphrodite forced Psyche to complete a series of impossible tasks. She sorted mountains of grain, gathered golden wool, retrieved sacred water, even descended into the underworld itself. Through determination, suffering, and unwavering love, Psyche accomplished what no ordinary mortal could. Finally, the gods intervened. Zeus granted Psyche immortality. She was reunited with Cupid. Their marriage was restored. And Psyche herself became a goddess. Compare that story to Beauty and the Beast. A mysterious palace. An unseen husband. Fear giving way to love. Jealous sisters. A broken promise. Separation. Trials. Transformation. Reunion. The details differ, but the emotional architecture is strikingly similar. Scholars have debated for generations whether Villeneuve consciously borrowed from Cupid and Psyche, or simply inherited themes that had been circulating through European storytelling for centuries. The answer may be both. Stories are rarely born from a single source. They're rivers. Every generation adds another stream until it's impossible to tell where the water first began. But while mythology gave us the earliest echoes of Beauty and the Beast, history may have given us something even more remarkable. A real man. A real woman. A documented marriage. And a family whose portraits still stare back at us nearly 5 centuries later. His name was Petrus Gonsalvus. And if anyone deserves to be called the real beast, it's him.
Every fairy tale begins with a single page, and every legend leaves behind a taste. Before the castles, before the princesses, before the happily ever after, there were stories whispered around firelight. Stories of wolves, witches, kings, queens, magic, and survival. One now. Those legends have been transformed into something you can actually hold in your hands. Introducing Once Upon a Fudge, a collection unlike anything you've ever seen, inspired by the world's greatest fairy tales, crafted with premium ingredients, wrapped like ancient manuscripts, and sealed as though they belonged inside a forgotten royal library. Taste the forbidden sweetness of Snow White's poison apple, the golden decadence of Rapunzel's golden tower, the romance of Beauty and the Beast, the magic of Cinderella at midnight, the temptation of Hansel and Gretel's witch house, the courage of Little Red Riding Hood, the mystery beneath the sea with The Little Mermaid, the dreamlike elegance of Sleeping Beauty, the royal treasure of The Frog Prince, the sparkle of Fairy Godmother, the riches hidden inside Rumpelstiltskin's gold, and the bold darkness of The Big Bad Wolf. Every box opens like an ancient storybook. Every wrapper reveals another forgotten legend. Every bite uncovers another chapter. Because this isn't just dessert. It's a collection. It's an experience. It's a library. You can eat. Once Upon a Fudge. From Bambi's Sugar Syndicate. Every legend has a past. Every bite tells a story. Open the box. Uncover the legend. Taste the fairy tale.
Petrus Gonsalvus, the real beast. Every fairy tale eventually reaches a point where history begins to whisper. This is that moment. If there is one real person whose life may have helped shape Beauty and the Beast, it is Petrus Gonsalvus. His story doesn't begin in a magical castle. It begins on the Canary Islands in 1537. Petrus was born with an extraordinarily rare genetic condition known today as congenital generalized hypertrichosis, a disorder that causes excessive hair growth over much of the body and face. Even now, it remains one of the rarest conditions in the world. Fewer than 100 documented cases have been recorded throughout modern medical history. But in the 16th century, medicine had no explanation. Science had no answers. And fear filled the gap. To many people, Petrus didn't simply look different. He looked inhuman. Europe was fascinated by monsters. Medieval bestiaries described races of strange creatures living at the edges of the known world. Travelers returned with unbelievable stories. Rumors spread faster than facts. A child born covered in hair became something people believed they already understood. Not a boy. A beast. Around the age of 10, Petrus was taken from his home in the Canary Islands. Historical accounts indicate he was transported to the French court as a gift for King Henry II of France. Imagine that. A human being, wrapped up and presented like an exotic animal. To the people arranging the journey, he wasn't a child with dreams or fears. He was entertainment. A curiosity. Something to display. According to later accounts, Petrus was initially treated much like an animal upon his arrival. The court expected little from him beyond amusing the king and his guests. But then, something unexpected happened. They spoke to him, and he answered. The scholars at court quickly realized that the frightened boy before them wasn't a wild creature at all. He was intelligent, curious, polite, capable of learning. King Henry II ordered Petrus to receive the education normally reserved for members of the nobility. It may have begun as an experiment. The king reportedly wanted to see whether someone who looked so unusual could be civilized. The assumption itself says far more about the court than it ever did about Petrus. The results astonished everyone. Petrus learned to read and write. He mastered Latin. He studied classical subjects. He adopted the manners expected of a Renaissance gentleman. He wore elegant clothing. He dined with nobles. He conducted himself with remarkable dignity. In other words, the only thing unusual about Petrus was the hair covering his body. Everything else challenged the prejudices of the people around him. Yet admiration came with limits. Petrus was educated, respected by many, welcomed into court life, but never completely accepted. To Europe's aristocracy, he remained something between a nobleman and an exhibit. They praised his intelligence, then invited visitors to stare at him. They admired his manners, then treated him as living proof of nature's oddities. It was acceptance, with an asterisk. A life suspended between humanity and spectacle. Then, after King Henry II died in 1559, everything changed. Because the next chapter of Petrus's life would become the part that echoes most powerfully through the pages of Beauty and the Beast. A royal marriage, arranged by a queen, between a beautiful young woman and the man Europe could not stop calling a beast. The Beauty and the Beast of the Renaissance. After the death of King Henry II, France entered a period of political uncertainty. Governing in the king's place was his widow, Queen Catherine de' Medici. Few women in European history have inspired as much fascination as Catherine. Brilliant, calculating, politically ruthless. She navigated one of the bloodiest periods in French history with a level of determination that earned both admiration and fear. At her court, appearances mattered. Bloodlines mattered. Curiosity mattered. And Petrus Gonsalves was still one of the greatest curiosities in Europe. Sometime during the early 1570s, Catherine arranged a marriage for him. The bride was a young woman named Catherine Raffaline, the daughter of one of her servants. History grows quiet here. We don't know exactly what Queen Catherine told the young woman before the wedding. We don't know whether she fully understood who she was about to marry. And we certainly don't know what went through her mind when she first saw Petrus standing at the altar. Later writers imagined shock, horror, even fear. It's easy to understand why, but imagination isn't evidence. The truth is, we simply don't know. What we do know is far more important. They stayed together. Not for a few months. Not for a few years. For roughly 4 decades. That's an extraordinary fact, especially during a period when marriages among the nobility were often little more than political arrangements. Portraits painted during their lifetime tell us something words cannot. In one famous painting, Catherine rests her hand gently on Petrus's shoulder. In Renaissance portraiture, gestures mattered. Artists rarely painted accidental details. A hand placed upon someone's shoulder often symbolized trust, partnership, affection. We should be careful not to romanticize the evidence. A painting cannot reveal every emotion inside a marriage, but neither does it depict a frightened prisoner standing beside a monster. Instead, we see a husband, a wife, and a family. Together, Petrus and Catherine had 7 children. 4 inherited their father's hypertrichosis, 3 did not. If you think that finally ended the exploitation, it didn't. In some ways, it made it worse. The Gonsalves children became objects of intense fascination among Europe's ruling families. Nobles requested to see them, artists painted them, physicians examined them. They were passed between royal courts as extraordinary curiosities. Imagine growing up knowing that powerful people weren't interested in your personality or your dreams, but in the fact that your face was covered in hair. That's not celebrity. That's dehumanization. Some members of the family were presented as lavish gifts to influential nobles, not because they had committed any crime, not because they had chosen that life, but because Europe's elite considered them remarkable specimens. It's difficult to read their story today without feeling uncomfortable. We often imagine the Renaissance as an age of enlightenment, of art, of science, of discovery. And it was, but it was also an age capable of treating human beings as collectibles. Petrus spent his entire life proving he possessed intelligence, education, dignity, and compassion, yet many people never looked beyond his appearance. Isn't that, ironically, the very lesson Beauty and the Beast asks us to confront? We don't know whether Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve ever saw one of the surviving portraits of the Gonsalves family. We don't possess a diary in which she credits Petrus as her inspiration. No smoking gun has ever been found. But we do know the family's story spread across Europe. Their portraits survived. Their lives became the subject of conversation among nobles, scholars, physicians, and collectors. By the 18th century, when Villeneuve began writing her famous fairy tale, the story of the hairy man who married a beautiful woman had been circulating for generations. Was Petrus Gonsalvus the inspiration for Beauty and the Beast? Historians can't say that with certainty. But was he an inspiration? The evidence makes that possibility remarkably difficult to ignore. And yet, even that may not be the most important part of his story. Because the greatest legacy Petrus left behind wasn't a fairy tale, it was a question. Why are human beings so quick to mistake appearance for character? The monster we created. When people hear the phrase Beauty and the Beast, they usually imagine a monster transformed into a prince. But perhaps we've been looking at the story backward all along. Maybe the real transformation wasn't the Beast's. Maybe it was ours. Across nearly every version of the tale, the Beast is introduced as something frightening, large, strange, different. Before he speaks, before he acts, before anyone knows the kind of person he is, he's already been judged. Sound familiar? Petrus Gonsalvus experienced that judgment every day of his life. He wasn't feared because of anything he had done. He was feared because of how he looked. His appearance became his identity in the eyes of others. It didn't matter that he was educated. It didn't matter that he spoke Latin. It didn't matter that he carried himself with dignity or that he built a family with Catherine. For many people, the hair was all they could see. That's a pattern woven throughout human history. We have always divided people into categories. Familiar, unfamiliar, safe, dangerous, us, them. Sometimes those judgments protect us. Other times, they blind us. Fairy tales often disguise psychological truths inside magical stories. Dragons become fear. Witches become temptation. Forests become the unknown. And beasts sometimes become our own assumptions. The remarkable thing about Beauty and the Beast isn't that a monster becomes human. It's that Beauty learns he was human all along. The transformation happens as much inside her as it does inside him. She begins the story seeing only his appearance. She ends it recognizing his character. That's why the tale has endured for centuries. Not because people believe curses are real, but because every generation understands what it feels like to be judged, or to judge someone else too quickly. The story also carried another message for the women who first heard it. In 18th century Europe, arranged marriages were still common. A young woman might meet her future husband only briefly before the wedding. Some barely knew the man they were expected to spend the rest of their lives with. To them, the Beast wasn't necessarily a monster. He represented uncertainty, the unknown, the fear of building a life with someone whose heart remained hidden. The fairy tale offered reassurance. It whispered that kindness could exist beneath intimidating appearances. that love sometimes grows slowly. That first impressions aren't always the final verdict. Of course, real life doesn't always follow fairy tale rules. Not every frightening stranger becomes a prince. Not every story ends happily. And that's where history parts ways with fantasy. Petrus Gonsalves didn't wake up one morning free of hypertrichosis. No spell was lifted. No fairy arrived. Society didn't suddenly embrace him. He simply lived his life as himself. Perhaps that's the greatest difference between the legend and the man who may have inspired it. The beast needed magic before the world accepted him. Petrus never had that luxury. He asked the world to see past his appearance. And too often, the world refused. That's a tragedy no fairy tale can completely erase. But it may explain why this story has survived for so long. Because somewhere deep down, we all hope people will see the person behind the surface. Sometimes, that's the hardest transformation of all. The final verdict. So, where did Beauty and the Beast really come from? The honest answer is, there isn't a single origin. Like nearly every great fairy tale, it wasn't born in one place or at one moment in history. It was assembled, piece by piece, century by century. A little mythology here, a little folklore there. A real family whose lives captured Europe's imagination. And finally, an author who wove those threads together into one unforgettable story. We can see the fingerprints of Cupid and Psyche, where love must survive fear, separation, and impossible trials. We recognize the echoes of Italian tales like The Pig King, where an animal bridegroom hides a human soul beneath an unsettling exterior. We see the recurring themes found in countless animal bridegroom folk tales from around the world, each exploring the same timeless question. Can we see someone's humanity before we judge their appearance? And then, we meet Petrus Gonsalves, a real man, a documented life, a husband, a father, a scholar, a gentleman, a man whose face became more famous than his character. His story didn't need embellishment. History had already done enough. Was Petrus Gonsalves the sole inspiration for Beauty and the Beast? Almost certainly not. There simply isn't enough evidence to make that claim. But could his extraordinary life have become one of the many threads woven into the tapestry of this fairy tale? Many historians believe it's entirely possible. His portraits circulated through Europe. His family became widely known among royal courts. His story survived long after his death. It's difficult to imagine that writers of later generations had never encountered it. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson isn't about discovering a single source. It's about understanding how stories evolve. Every generation inherits old tales. Some details are forgotten. Others are added. Heroes become kinder. Villains become simpler. The rough edges are sanded smooth. Until eventually, we mistake the latest version for the original. That's why exploring the history behind fairy tales is so fascinating. The deeper we dig, the more complicated they become. They stop being children's stories and start becoming windows into the fears, hopes, beliefs, and imagination of the people who first told them. In the end, Beauty and the Beast isn't really about magic. It isn't about enchanted roses, or talking furniture, or curses. It's about empathy. It's about prejudice. It's about looking beyond the surface. And perhaps that's why, after hundreds of years, the story still speaks to us. Because every generation eventually discovers the same truth. Sometimes, the real monster isn't standing in front of us. It's the judgment we carry with us before we've taken the time to truly see another human being. And that may be the oldest fairy tale lesson of them all. Fairy tales have a strange way of surviving. Kingdoms disappear. Empires rise and fall. Languages change. Borders move. Yet somehow, the stories remain. They travel across centuries, changing a little each time they're told, carrying fragments of the people who first whispered them around fires, in castles, and inside humble cottages. Beauty and the Beast isn't just the story of a cursed prince. It's the story of fear giving way to understanding, of prejudice challenged by compassion, of discovering that appearances rarely tell the whole story. And perhaps it's also the story of a remarkable man named Petrus Gonsalvus, whose humanity was overlooked by a world too fascinated by his appearance to truly see him. Whether his life directly inspired the fairy tale or simply became one thread in its long history, his story deserves to be remembered on its own. Not as a curiosity, not as a monster, but as a husband, a father, and a man who lived with extraordinary dignity despite extraordinary circumstances. The next time you watch Beauty and the Beast, remember that behind every fairy tale lies another story. Sometimes it's hidden in mythology. Sometimes it's buried in forgotten folklore. And sometimes it's written in the lives of real people history almost forgot. If you enjoyed this journey into the true history behind Beauty and the Beast, you're going to love what's waiting for you here on the channel. We don't just tell fairy tales. We peel them apart. We trace them back through history, mythology, archaeology, religion, folklore, and the forgotten lives that inspired them. If that sounds like your kind of rabbit hole, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the stories hidden beneath the stories. Because around here, we don't rewrite history. We excavate it. To everyone in the Pizzaverse, thank you. Whether you've been here since the beginning or you just discovered the channel today, your support makes documentaries like this possible. Every comment, every share, every like, and every subscription helps preserve these forgotten stories and brings history to people who may never have encountered it otherwise. I truly appreciate every one of you for joining me on these adventures through history's forgotten corners. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay curious. Keep asking questions. and never stop looking beyond the surface. Because sometimes, the greatest stories aren't the ones we were told. They're the ones waiting to be rediscovered. I'll see you in the next documentary.
Tale as old as time, true as it can be. Barely even friends, then somebody bends unexpectedly. Just a little change, small to say the least, both a little scared, neither one prepared, Beauty and the Beast. Ever just the same, ever a surprise, ever as before, ever just as sure as the sun will rise. Tale as old as time, tune as old as song, bittersweet and strange, finding you can change, learning you were wrong. Certain as the sun, rising in the east, tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, Beauty and the Beast. Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, Beauty and the Beast.
Every town has a story. Every legend has a beginning. But some legends begin with a disappearance. For more than 700 years, people have remembered the man with the pipe, the colorful clothes, the haunting melody, the army of rats marching toward the river. But there is one problem. The oldest records barely mention the rats at all. They remember something else. 130 children who walked out of the town of Hamelin and were never seen again. What happened on that summer day in 1284? Was it a plague? A religious movement? A migration into distant lands? Or did history slowly bury the truth beneath a fairy tale that was easier to tell? This isn't the Disney version. This isn't the bedtime story. This is the mystery that has haunted Europe for centuries. Ancient chronicles, forgotten church windows, medieval records, and clues hidden in plain sight. Together, they tell the story of a town that may have lost an entire generation. What if the Pied Piper wasn't the villain? What if he never existed at all? And what if the real horror was the truth history chose to forget? From the earliest chronicles to modern historical investigations, we follow the evidence wherever it leads. No myths, no magic, just history at its most unsettling. This is the story everyone thinks they know. This is the mystery almost nobody has heard. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. The day the children vanished. Coming soon. Only on the Pizzaverse.
Trying to shoot down angels, they're trying to pull their wings off so they can't fly. And oh, but she's so brave though, just like a tornado, she's taking us by storm. You can't stop the girl from going, you can't stop the world from knowing the truth will set you free. They're trying to take our voices, they're trying to make our choices, so we scream loud, loud, loud. And oh, I know you feel the lightning, and it's so exciting, so here we come. You can't stop the girl from going, you can't stop the world from knowing the truth will set you free. I know you feel the lightning, it's so exciting, so here we come.